Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever and wherever you're watching or listening. This is the Stochastic NHL DFS Strategy Show, and I am not Josh Harris. I am your host, Michael Clifford. Josh is going through it right now. He's had some technological issues on his end, so he's going to try to get in when he can, when his laptop cooperates, but you're stuck with me for right now. Interesting slate we have on the board here tonight. We have 8 games. It feels weird that they didn't include the Columbus-Detroit outdoor game. That one is at 6 o'clock Eastern, so I get it. Usually they don't include those games, but we still have 8 games to go through here tonight. Little bit of news this afternoon. It's actually kind of funny that Josh hasn't been able to log on yet because the New York Rangers finally traded Ryan Lindgren. Him and Jimmy Vesey are going to Colorado in exchange for a Juuso Parssinen, Calvin DeHaan, a second-round pick, and a fourth-round pick. Ask just about any Rangers fan. They've been begging to get rid of Ryan Lindgren for a long time now. So he is gone. The team, obviously without Adam Fox as well right now, it's kind of iffy on whether Lindgren will be able to turn his season around, actually multiple seasons. It's been a little while since Lindgren has really turned in a good year. Now, a lot of it is related to injuries. He hasn't really been his usual self. Like, a couple of years ago, he was a solid defensive defenseman. Now he's been more or less pretty much a boat anchor, but if he can regain that form against lesser competition or what have you, then maybe the Colorado Avalanche have something here, but I'm somewhat dubious. So we'll see how that goes, but enough talking about trades that don't really matter for the slate. The Rangers are playing right now or playing tomorrow. Sorry. As a matter of fact, but we'll talk about them next week when they're on the board. We do have 8 games. Before we get any further, I'm just going to drop the link in the chat for anybody that might be looking to join Stochastic Premium. Just click through that link right there. If you type in Stochastic 15, you get 15% off your first weekly or monthly package. These shows will keep coming through to the end of the season and into the playoffs. We do appreciate support if anybody does feel the need to join, but if you don't, no big deal. Like I said, we'll still be here. Hopefully the tools that we show you and the people that do end up winning some money can convince you otherwise. But like I said, the shows will be here. We appreciate the support one way or another. Let's get into the slate. John asks, who wins that trade? I mean, for me, it's the Rangers. I think Calvin DeHaan is just straight up the better defenseman at this point. Maybe, like I said, maybe Lindgren turns around. Like if this was 2 years ago, I would have said getting Lindgren is the better idea. In the 2 years since, Lindgren's just been a really bad defenseman. So like DeHaan might straight up be better than him right now. And getting the second and a fourth round pick on top of that, I think is a pretty good deal. But like I said, enough of that trade. Let's get into this slate. Our very first game, representing here today, our beloved Montreal Canadiens, at least my beloved Montreal Canadiens, have a 3.0 total. They're going into Buffalo. The Buffalo Sabres have a 3.5 total. A little bit of injury news on both sides here. Kirby Dach, another knee surgery, same knee that he tore last year. That's not a good thing. So he's out for the rest of the season. I suspect Owen Beck is just going to remain in a second line spot, at least to the trade deadline. We'll see what happens after that. On the Buffalo side, Jason Zucker still out. So, we saw Alex Tuch jump to the top power play unit for Buffalo in their last game. That's kind of important for Tuch. He hasn't been getting a lot of top power play time. But, let's go through this right now. Montreal and Buffalo, they had an interesting game earlier this season. In fact, the last time Montreal was in Buffalo, it was in the middle of December, and Montreal had just come off back-to-back losses, including an absolute beatdown at the hands of the Penguins. It was 9-2. And then less than a week later, they host Buffalo and they beat them 6-1. And that kind of kicked off that the I wouldn't say necessarily a winning streak, though they did have a pretty good streak there for a while, but the turnaround in their play has basically persisted more or less since that game in the middle of December. So we have a rematch here. The Montreal top line has had some pretty good games recently. Obviously, Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield specifically. The Montreal top line is 18,200 today. 7.9% top two stack, 3.9% ownership. Overall, it's really not that bad when you kind of consider that, with Kirby Dach out. I said the other day that when this lineup is healthy, they don't really give the top line, the 19, 20, 21 minutes that we sometimes see. With Kirby Dach out, I think you're going to see that more. I think you're going to see lines 2, 3, and 4. Everybody basically play between 11 and 15 minutes, and then Slafkovsky at 17, Caulfield 18 to 19, and then Suzuki around 20. I think you're going to see more minutes from that top line. I'm not really concerned about any of the matchups coming back the other way from the Buffalo Sabres. So, I don't really have an issue going to the Habs here. 18,200 is kind of steep, and, we'll get to Edmonton a little bit later. We'll get to Anaheim a little bit later. There are other spots in that price range that I think you might want to gravitate towards anyway. But 18,200 for a line where the guys are probably going to play 18 to 20 minutes. They're perfectly correlated, facing a poor defensive team that doesn't really have that good of a penalty kill. I think it's perfectly fine to use Montreal. They're not at the top of my board in that price range. But they're not far behind either. What I will also mention is that third line of Josh Anderson, Christian Dvorak, and Brendan Gallagher. It's basically going to be their second line now. Owen Beck is not going to play 16, 17 minutes like Kirby Dach was, at least not right now. Patrick Laine might, depending on how much power play time he gets. But that Dvorak, Anderson, Gallagher line is probably going to be their third line now. I don't have a tremendous amount of faith in them, mainly because you can tell Josh Anderson's playing hurt, he just straight up is. And they've taken a downturn basically, since early January. I think they're in play in the sense that it's not a bad matchup, and at 10,200 you can fit them in with the expensive lines. There are a few expensive lines you might want to get to here tonight, but I think my target on the Montreal side would certainly be the top line. They've been really good offensively since January 1st, 3.1 expected goals, 3.8 actual goals. Slafkovsky in his last 15 games is nearly 2 shots per game, which isn't a super high bar, but considering where he's normally been this season, that's not that bad. So I have no problem playing Montreal. They're not necessarily at the top of my board. What is interesting is the Buffalo side. Tage Thompson and JJ Peterka are going to be getting Ryan McLeod as a center. Now, it seems weird. Over the last few games, certainly since they returned from the Four Nations break, Buffalo's been constantly rearranging their lines, especially since Jordan Greenway got back. There's been at least 2 games where Thompson started the game with Kulich and Peterka and finished the game with Tuck and Greenway. So how long these lines last, I guess we'll see. But, Tage Thompson and Ryan McLeod don't have great numbers together, but they haven't played a ton together either. I think this is more of a matchup thing. They want to get a more defensively responsible player on the top line other than Kulich so that they can put them out against Suzuki and company and then have their second and third lines kind of feast on what isn't a very good Montreal middle six forward group, especially with Kirby Dach out. The other thing is that Buffalo top power play unit has certainly turned around basically since Christmas. With Jason Zucker out, I imagine Alex Tuck will be up there. I'm perfectly fine with going with Buffalo 1. For me, I just have a hard time paying the same amount as the Montreal top line, considering it's Ryan McLeod on the top line. Nothing against Ryan McLeod. He's a fine player. He's a guy I would want on my team in real life. DFS, not so much. I think the line that honestly kind of interests me is Tuck, Cousins, and Greenway. Cousins and Tuck have been really good together this season. I was looking at their minutes, over 100 minutes together without Tage Thompson or JJ Peterka. So 100 minutes for Cousins and Tuck without the other two best offensive players on their team. 3.1 expected goals for per 60, 70 shot attempts, 4.3 actual goals per 60, sorry. Shooting 12%. That's a little high, but even if it's like 10%, there's still a really good scoring line. They're going to get a lot of middle six matchups. Tuck is getting some top power play time. They're under 15K. They're coming in a little bit over-owned, 9.1%, but I don't think it's that bad considering they have a top two stack of nearly 5%. I think Tuck makes a fine one-off here, especially given all the ice time that he's going to be getting, especially now with the power play time. I really like Buffalo 2 here. Buffalo 3 for me is a little bit overpriced. They're a genuine third line on this team, and they're 13,200. Like, it's not a bad matchup, but honestly, I'd rather just pay the extra $1,700 to go to Buffalo 2. So I think Buffalo 2 is actually my favorite line on the Buffalo side. Between the top lines, I would prefer to play Montreal, but I think both are very much in play. Like, this is a 6.5 total. There are goals expected here. So there are a lot of forwards that I think are very playable here tonight. I would go Buffalo 2, Montreal 1, Buffalo 1, and then Montreal 3. But it's really that Buffalo second line as a mid-price line that I have interest in. I think Alex Tuck makes it perfectly fine one-off given his production of late, given the fact that he's on the top power play and he's fine as a one-off, but I really do like that Buffalo second line. All right, let's jump to our next one. This one is a dandy. We have the San Jose Sharks with a 2.3 total going into Ottawa. The Ottawa Senators have a 3.6 total. Big news for Ottawa is they're getting all their players, 3 players back. Brady Tkachuk is in the lineup. Josh Norris is in the lineup. Shane Pinto is also in the lineup. So Ottawa is basically fully healthy now. They're going with a top line of Tkachuk, Stützle, and Giroux. And it's funny, I mentioned to Josh in our chat today about how the Ottawa Senators have been faring this year. Stützle and Tkachuk on the ice at 5-on-5 without Jake Sanderson, 3.6 goals per 60 minutes, that's not super elite, but it's the tier just under it. Stützle and Tkachuk on the ice with Jake Sanderson, 0.5 goals per 60. Now, it's obviously all shooting percentage related, but I thought it really funny that they're basically just not scoring when they're on the ice and sort of a shutdown role. Regardless, that Ottawa top line in the top stacks tool, it has the highest top 2 stack on the board here tonight. They're higher than Carolina. They're higher than Winnipeg. Now, they're going to carry a lot of ownership. They're one of the highest projected owned lines as well. And they're priced up a little bit, 20,900. But assuming that they go with the power plays that they were running before Norris got hurt, then Tkachuk, Stützle, and Giroux are going to be perfectly correlated. On the top power play unit, San Jose's penalty kill is not god-awful. They're not like Minnesota, St. Louis awful, but they're definitely below average. And the Ottawa power play has definitely thrived this year. Like, Ottawa's been one of the worst 5-on-5 scoring teams in the NHL this season. I was looking earlier today. They're the worst since Christmas. And they're second worst on the season. The only team that has a lower 5-on-5 goal rate is Nashville. But they have been really good on the power play. And if that power play comes through, obviously it's that top line and top unit that is going to do a lot of the damage. So I think playing Ottawa 1 is perfectly fine here. 20,900 is fairly expensive considering there aren't really a ton of cheap lines. Like, if you look at the under 12K range, you're looking at basically just third and fourth lines, or maybe something from like Philadelphia or Chicago. So there's not really a lot here, but at 20,900 with a top 2 stack of 23.9%, I think you do have to heavily consider Ottawa here. I don't think I'm going to play them personally. I just think that there are a bunch of lines under 20K that are very playable here tonight, so I don't really feel the need to go all the way up there. Listen, Brady Tkachuk is probably the best one off on the board here tonight. 17.8 projected DK points. That's 2.7 more points, or sorry, 3.6 more points than the next closest player. And that's a goaltender, and it's a goaltender from his own team. He's projected for over 3.5 more points than the next closest skater. So Brady Tkachuk, definitely one of the top one-offs on the board. If you don't want a full stack, I think just one off in Tkachuk and then looking for cheaper stacks elsewhere is perfectly fine. But Ottawa one certainly very much in play here. I don't have a ton of interest in the Ottawa depth. Josh Norris and Drake Batherson have been awful together this season. They played 235 minutes without Brady Tkachuk, 2 expected goals, 1.5 actual goals per 60 minutes. It's just not a whole lot. Like, Batherson's on the top power play unit, so if you want to one-off him, then fine. But I think this is an Ottawa game where I really want to focus on the power play guys because they do draw a ton of power play opportunities, 3.3 power play opportunities per game over the last 5 weeks of NHL action. That leads the league. They're near the top since Christmas. San Jose's penalty kill, as I mentioned, below average. Ottawa power play, whenever Ottawa has succeeded, it's the power play that's come through for them. So I think if I'm playing anything, it's the Ottawa top line. If you want to make it a power play stack, go ahead. But I think at the very least, you have to consider Brady Tkachuk as a one-off, if not full stacking that line. On the San Jose side, I think the San Jose side is honestly more interesting to me. That San Jose top line is not overly expensive. 16,400 here. Now they're coming in with more ownership than a top 2 stack percentage, but the top 2 stack percentage is almost 9%. That's definitely not nothing on a slate like this. It's the 8th highest top 2 stack on the night. Ottawa's penalty kill has generally been good. That's the one thing that does concern me, but it's 16,400 that helps alleviate some concerns. Now, there might be spots later on in the slate that we'll talk about in that 15 to 17K range that you might go to. It's not my absolute favorite line in that price range, but they do have the highest top 2 stack projection in that price range, 15 to 17,000 on DraftKings. So I think if you're looking for a mid-price line, you have to at least consider them. What I will say is that San Jose 2 is what's interesting to me here. These guys are 11,600. Wenberg, Zetterlund, Will Smith. Will Smith is on the top power play unit. Again, this is a tough power play matchup, but we always say getting top power play time is better than not getting top power play time. 11,600 makes them true filler status. The other night against Montreal, they were great. It's not very good. Like they had Will Smith had a goal and assist. Fabian Zetterlund had a goal. The line this season, Smith and Zetterlund this season together, 3.1 expected goals, 4.2 actual goals per 60 minutes. Zetterlund's on pace for another 20-goal season. He had 24 last year. Will Smith, since they moved him away from Barclay Goodrow and Luke Cunningham, has looked like a top prospect, which he is. Like I mentioned, that Ottawa second line has been pretty bad. Defensively, the Ottawa second line, 2.8 expected goals against, 3 actual goals against per 60 at 5-on-5. That Smith, Zetterlund, Wenberg line is one of my favorite cheap stacks on the night. It is one of those filler stacks that you can put with one of those 20K lines like we'll talk about later. I think I'm more interested in San Jose too, but obviously in this game, it's about Ottawa's top line. It's about Ottawa's top power play unit. It's just about whether or not Ottawa falls on their face because they've been doing a lot of that since the break, but getting back Pinto, Norris, and Tkachuk especially should help there. So Ottawa 1, then San Jose 2. I think you should at least consider San Jose 1, especially if you're playing a bunch of lineups here tonight. But I think their second line, because of the 5-on-5 matchup and because of their filler status, is kind of where my interest is in this game. All right. Edmonton, 3.0 total going into Carolina. Carolina has a 3.5 total. Carolina finally broke out offensively somewhat in the last game. Mikko Rantanen had a multi-point game. I think Sebastian Aho had a goal as well. Wasn't the big night we were hoping for, especially without how hot Carolina started. But, Rantanen and Aho are up near 100 minutes together, 3.5 expected goals per 60. Rantanen and Aho both playing over 20 minutes a game. Svechnikov, his last 15 games, he's had 2.5 shots per game. That's not great, but considering it struggles at times this season, that's pretty good. They're going to be going up against an Edmonton team that's really, really been going through it since they returned from the Four Nations break. Edmonton's penalty kill is kind of like the San Jose one we just talked about, where they're not god-awful, but they're definitely below average. Now, the Carolina power play is shooting 5% since Mikko Rantanen got there. Obviously, it won't keep shooting 5%. And when that turns around, they'll be closer to what they were earlier in the season. Edmonton's been taking more penalties of late, 2.6 times shorthanded per game over the last 5 weeks of NHL action. That's not terrible, but it's about middle of the league. And they're, for most of the season, they were below average or better than average, how you want to look at it, for not taking penalties. So they have been more penalized. Carolina top line is playing very well. Carolina top line is expensive again. They are 20,900. They're the same price as the Ottawa top line that we just talked about. 18.2% top two stack, 7.5% ownership. I mean, I think it is a really good spot. What worries me is that, listen, Edmonton's definitely not played well since they returned from the break, but generally speaking, this has been a really good team for most of the season. Now, do they keep playing poorly? Do they need to get home kind of for like a little bit of a reset? Like it has been a tough schedule, right? We talked about how McDavid had a quick turnaround. This is the team's 5th road game in 8 days. They go home after this one. So maybe they're kind of looking ahead to just going home and they're just kind of mailing this one in. But Edmonton has generally been fine defensively this season. But again, the penalty kill has struggled. They've looked really bad since coming out of the break. They gave up 6 against Philly, 7 against Washington, and 4 each against Tampa Bay and Florida. I do think you have to give Carolina one a lot of consideration here. In a nutshell, I would still rather play Ottawa, but I think Carolina is perfectly playable here, especially where that Carolina top line is probably going to get second and third line matchups. That Edmonton second line, Draisaitl, the defensive numbers have been on the slide. Excuse me. Basically since Christmas. Still not awful, but below average since Christmas. So pretty good matchups for that Carolina top line. Again, I'd rather play Ottawa, but I think they're in play. The Carolina line that's interesting to me here is Jarvis, Stahl, and Martinook. 13,900. They're not quite filler status, but there are a bunch of $17,000 and $18,000 lines that I have interest in here tonight, so they fit in perfectly well with them. 1.8% top two stack, 2.6% ownership. That Carolina line since Christmas, 3.2 expected goals, 2.6 actual goals per 60, both above average. Said Jarvis has 20 points in his last 20 games, averaging 2.5 shots per game. He's on the top power play unit as well. So I don't mind Carolina 1. I think Carolina 2, depending kind of how I think I'm going to be building my lineup today, is the one that I'm considering more. I'm going to be honest, it's the Edmonton side that interests me a little bit more here, just because this is another situation where they're really cheap. Like McDavid, Hyman, and Nugent Hopkins are now under 20 or under 19K, 18,900, 11% top two stack, 7.2% ownership. It's a tough matchup going up against Jordan Stahl. That's one thing, is that they're going to see the Jordan Stahl line. The Jordan Stahl line since Christmas, 2.3 expected goals against, 1.6 actuals. Just really, really tough defensively. And Carolina still has a really good penalty kill. So it does take a little bit of the shine off of Edmonton. And, they are changing up their lines quite a bit. So I have my doubts how long Ryan Nugent-Hopkins stays on the top line. Nugent-Hopkins is having a very bad season. I think McDavid is fine as a one-off. I think Hyman kind of makes sense as a one-off, but I'm going to be honest. I think it's Draisaitl Arvidsson that is really getting my interest here. They're going to avoid that Stahl matchup, which is the matchup that you want to avoid. We say it all the time, going into Carolina to face that Stahl line is pretty much death for most lines that most top lines, that go into Carolina. So I don't really have a ton of interest in playing McDavid here tonight for that reason. But here's the thing. When Carolina is at home and they send out Stahl against the top line, when the Stahl line is off the ice, their expected goals against goes up like 25%, and their actual goals against has literally doubles. They are a below average defensive team when that Stahl line is off the ice. And just look at the season Leon Draisaitl's having. He's on pace for what? Over 60 goals and over 60 assists. He's on what, like a 6-game goal scoring streak or something like that. Draisaitl and Arvidsson have generally been pretty good together this year. I get that Edmonton has looked pretty bad, but considering that this is not a matchup where I'm really focusing on the special teams, and considering this is a matchup where Draisaitl isn't going to see a lot of Jordan Stahl, Draisaitl as a one-off at 7,900, I think makes sense. Like, he's only $300 more expensive than Tim Stützle, and I know it's dynamic pricing and all that, but Draisaitl's literally on pace for a 60-goal, 60-assist season, and he's only $300 more expensive than Tim Stützle. I think Draisaitl as a one-off makes a lot of sense. Draisaitl, Arvidsson, two-man, I think makes some sense here. It's that Edmonton second line I have more interest in. Now, if you want to play the top line, go to McDavid. That's fine. I just think the 5-on-5 matchup is brutal. The penalty-killing matchup is brutal. And for those reasons, I'm more focused on the 5-on-5 matchup. So it's Edmonton 2 and Carolina 2 that I have the interest in here in this game. It's not necessarily the top lines. All right, let's move along to our next one. Philadelphia Flyers. They're going into Winnipeg. The Flyers have a 2.3 total. The Winnipeg Jets have a 3.1 total. As far as we know, the Flyers are going with the same lineup. Listen, the Flyers had an epic choke the other night, up 3-0 against Pittsburgh. Ended up losing 5-4 in overtime. Definitely not what you want to see, but maybe torches is mad and really shakes things up. But Forster, Cates, Brink, they're not on my radar again. I know they burned us a couple games ago. In fact, I think a Stochastic subscriber, somebody that's not usually in Discord, but somebody with a Stochastic Avi took down the $20 with Brink, Cates, Forster. Like, congrats to them. I certainly wasn't in on them. Out on them, Travis Konechny and Scott Lawton, 145 minutes together this season, 51 shot attempts per 60, 1.2 goals per 60 at 5-on-5. Like, pass. Again, but kind of by default, it's Tippett, Michkov, and Couturier, that I would have interest in here. But by the same token, they're 13,400. I'd kind of rather just go play that Stahl line. You know what I mean? That's just kind of the way that I look at it. It's like, Michkov, Couturier, and Tippett, they're a good line, but that San Jose Wenberg line I talked about earlier, they're $1,500 cheaper facing Ottawa and not facing Connor Hellebuck. So I guess I'm just kind of out on the Flyers entirely. Like, again, if anything, Tippett, Michkov, Konechny, or Couturier, would be where I would go. Maybe like a two-man of like Tippett, Michkov or something like that. But generally speaking, I just don't have a lot of interest in the Flyers. The Winnipeg penalty kill has been getting a little bit better. Winnipeg doesn't really take many penalties anyway. Connor Hellebuck is Connor Hellebuck. So I'm out on the Flyers. Now, the Winnipeg side is where the interest is here. There's been like very few more Jekyll and Hyde teams than the Philadelphia Flyers. At times they look like one of the best defensive teams in the league. At times they look like a literal lottery team. It's very Buffalo Sabres-esque in that sense. The Philadelphia penalty kill, their last 25 games has been pretty good. And, that's something Josh and I had talked about, how the Philadelphia PK had really struggled through the first couple months of the season. Over their last 25 games, not been the same. Fewest shots against per minute on the penalty kill, fourth fewest goals against per minute on the penalty kill. And they're not taking a lot of penalties either. Only 2 times shorthanded per game. over the last 5 weeks, one of the lowest rates in the league. The only teams lower are Vegas and Detroit. If you look, going back all the way until Christmas, again, third lowest rate of penalties per game in the league. So this isn't really a good power play spot for Winnipeg. Now, the Winnipeg top line, 21,300. They're more expensive than Carolina top line that we just talked about. They're more expensive than the Ottawa top line that we just talked about. Now, they have had some massive games this season, even in tough matchups now, and they're at home, so they'll be able to dictate their matchups. But one of the reasons why I'm giving them a little bit of consideration over a team like San Jose or even Carolina is the ownership. 4.7% ownership, and they're only $400 more expensive than those lines we just mentioned. I do think you have to give some consideration to Winnipeg 1 here, but Winnipeg 2 is, again, this is another mid-price line where I have a little bit of interest. That Winnipeg second line since Christmas, 62 shot attempts per 60, 3.3 expected goals per 60. Those are really good numbers at 5-on-5. 15,400 is a little steep, considering these guys play like 15 minutes on the low end for like Nemesnikov and Perfidi. Ehlers can get up to 17 minutes because he's on the top power play unit. It's a steep price, but they've been playing extremely well at 5-on-5. This isn't a matchup where I'm super concerned about the power play guys. The thing is like at 15,400, like I'll just go pay an extra $1,000 and go play that San Jose line. There are other lines we'll get to a little bit later in the 15, 17K range I'd rather play. So I'm going to say, generally speaking, in a single entry, I'm probably out on this game entirely. There are just expensive lines that I would rather play, and then there are mid-price lines that I would rather play as well. If I were going to play anything from here, it would be Winnipeg 2. They've been extremely proficient at 5-on-5 for a couple months now, even longer, like 3 months now. So I have no problem playing Winnipeg 2. But again, I think this is a situation where I'm probably not super interested in this game. Niederreiter, Lowry, Appleton, some two-man from that. If you need some super cheap players, is fine. But I'm going to be honest, I think I'm generally out on this game. Okay, speaking of out on a game, Los Angeles Kings, 2.6 total. They're going into St. Louis Blues. They have a 2.8 total. Los Angeles played last night. I watched that game. Dallas kind of manhandled them. Dallas has looked really good for a while now. I think I mentioned this on Blue Sky. Basically, going back to American Thanksgiving, Dallas has been a top 3 team in the NHL. Goal share, expected goal share, all that stuff. And, half of those games were without Mason Marchment. Tyler Seguin only played like 2 out of the 38 games or whatever in that span. Miro Heiskanen's been out for 8-9 games and counting. Their power play has been bad basically until Thomas Harley took over when Heiskanen got hurt. So there were a lot of things working against them, and they've still been a top 3 team in the league. Dallas looked really good. The Kings did not. The Kings have been changing up their lines of late, trying to find a little bit of offense. Last night they had Fiala, Byfield, and Kempe together. Now, they stayed together pretty much the entire game. It was the other lines that got mixed up a little bit. Kopitar started the game with Laferriere and Turcotte. Then he got Warren Fogle. Then he got Trevor Moore. Seems like Kopitar and Laferriere are going to be a 2-man. I imagine the Fiala-Byfield line stays together as well. Fiala-Byfield line is really, really, really expensive. $20,200. Like, don't get me wrong. I like that line a lot. And if you look at the offensive numbers for Byfield and Kempe whenever they play without Kopitar, they're really good together. 72 shot attempts, 3.1 expected goals, 3.4 actual goals per 60 minutes. You get Fiala and Kempe on the top power play unit. Fiala's averaged 3 shots per game over his last 10 games. He's been really productive for a couple months now. But it's $20,200 on a team that has an awful power play, right? Like, this is basically like stacking the New York Islanders at $20,200. And, last I saw, the Islanders were actually having a pretty good day today, but that was against Nashville. So, what can you do? Fiala, Kempe, Byfield, like they're playable. That's a steep price for a line where the power play upside is fairly limited. Now, I think if I get the ownership play because they're only projected for 1.6% ownership. I'm going to be honest, if I'm going to spend over $20K, I'll just go pay an extra $1,100, play Winnipeg 1, and they're projected under 5% ownership. Like, yeah, the ownership is technically 3 times as high, but the difference between like 4.5% and 1.5% for me isn't enough for, one line being arguably the best power play in the NHL this season, and the other line only having 2 guys on the power play and a power play that's terrible besides that. I think I'm out on that Kings line, that expensive Kings line at the very least. Now, what you want to do with the rest of the Kings, we don't exactly know what their lineup is going to look like. Mercifully, there are still a bunch of games after them that start, so you can swap if you want. I'm going to be honest, I think I'm just out on Los Angeles here. And it's just in single entry. And it's just the fact that if I'm going to play an expensive line, it's not going to be that Kings line. We don't really know what the rest of the lineups are going to look like. And do I really want to play like Kopitar, Laferriere? I guess you can do that if you want. I don't have like a huge problem playing like a Kopitar, Laferriere 2-man. Like Kopitar's not shooting. I think he has 24 shots in his last 12 games. It's like, what do you even do with that? Laferriere and Kopitar are both on the top power play unit, so at least you get power play correlation. Playing with Alex Turcotte, hope Turcotte plays with him. If not, just go with the 2-man. Like, I guess that's fine, but considering how low the power play upside is here, and again, I mentioned earlier, like St. Louis's penalty kill has been better since the break, but generally speaking, since Christmas, St. Louis has had one of the worst penalty kills in the NHL. So if I want to stack against St. Louis, it's because of the power play matchup. And the only thing worse than the St. Louis penalty kill is the Los Angeles power play. So I'm just out on the Kings. On the St. Louis side, listen, that top line, I agree, quick party, that 11-7 is really getting frustrating. I get it. They don't have 12 forwards that they can really rely on. I'd say just go make a damn trade. Like, go trade your surplus defenseman for a forward. Like, I know that means one of Clark or Spence, but so be it. Anyway, the St. Louis top line, Buchnevich, Thomas, and Neighbors. Since January 1st, 3.1 expected goals, 4.2 actual goals per 60. Buchnevich and Thomas skating like 19 to 20 minutes. Neighbors, he's around 16 because he gets top power play time on the other unit. Robert Thomas has 54 shots in his last 20 games. Remember, this is a guy a couple of years ago that would struggle to get to 2 shots per game. His last 20 games, quarter of a season, he's at about 3.7 shots per game. Sorry. He's been really productive besides that. It is a tough matchup going up against the Kings. So that St. Louis top line isn't necessarily one of my favorite lines on the board here tonight, but they are only 14,500. They do have a 3.8% top 2 stack, and they do have a lot less ownership than the Kyrou line, like about half the ownership. So I think Thomas, Buchnevich, and Neighbors is my favorite line in this game. They've been playing well. Maybe I'm biased because I had a big night with them a week ago today, but they have been playing well offensively. Thomas and Buchnevich are getting good ice time. Thomas has been really productive and shooting a lot. They're coming in with half the ownership that the second line is. Their 14,500 is a very reasonable price as long as you're not playing like a $21,000 line elsewhere. So I think it's St. Louis one for me that I'm most interested in this game. It is a bad power play matchup for them. Not that they have a good power play anyway, but I think it's St. Louis 1, then probably St. Louis 2, and then I guess Kopitar, Laferriere, but I just don't have a lot of interest in the Kings here tonight. Moving to the next game, New Jersey Devils. The Devils have a 2.7 total. They're going into Utah. Utah has a 2.9 total. Utah, very, very good game the other night. we were on the Utah Utes against, who's it against the other night? It wasn't Chicago, was it? No, Minnesota. Yeah, Chicago, they barely won. Minnesota, they pounded them. Utah going with Cooley, Keller, and Schmaltz again as a top line. I mean, why break up a good thing when it's rolling? Second line of Genther, Hayton, and Alex Kerfoot. The thing that concerns me about that Utah top line, I mean, Keller, Cooley, and Schmaltz, is they're riding really, really hot. That line is shooting nearly 18% at 5-on-5. Like 12% would be a really high shooting percentage. So while they're scoring a ton, I expect that goal scoring to come down a lot. And, this is kind of a tough power play matchup. Like the Devils have generally had a pretty good penalty kill this season, even as the team's kind of fallen apart over the last 6 weeks or whatever. Their last 16 games, third fewest shots against per minute on the penalty kill, third fewest goals against per minute on the penalty kill. And remember, that's without Jacob Markstrom in a lot of those games. So it's a tough power play matchup. That line is really riding hot at 5-on-5. It reminds me of that Vegas top line early in the season when Barbashev and Stone and Eichel were just shooting like 23% or whatever. So it's concerning. Like they are a good line besides, but they are riding extremely hot. And that's why I think I kind of have a little bit of interest in going back to Utah too here. Genther, Hayton, and Kerfoot. Hayton and Genther this season, they're up to 90 minutes without Clayton Keller, 2.9 expected goals, 2.6 actual goals. It's not great, but it's not bad. Shooting percentage, a much more reasonable 10%. Barrett Hayton, 3 shots per game over his last 15 games. Him and Genther are playing like 19 minutes a game, 18 to 19 minutes a game. They're going to get more middle six matchups. I don't know if anybody's seen New Jersey's middle six. The Hischier line, obviously good. The third and fourth lines are terrible. They get really good 5-on-5 matchups. 13,900. They're basically priced as a filler. Now they're coming in with more ownership than top 2 stack. But at 13,900, you can play them with those other 18K lines. We're going to get to a couple of those here in a second. But I think it's Utah 2 that I have more interest in. Both lines very much in play, but I think Utah 2 is where I have interest. I will shout out Utah 3 here. Josh Doan and Lawson Krause have been really, really good together. Now, Doan's generally just been really good since he got called up. But with Doan and Krause on the ice, it's not a huge sample yet, obviously. But with Doan and Krause on the ice this season, 140 minutes together, 3.3 expected goals per 60, 3.1 actual goals per 60. Those are great offensive numbers. Now, I think some of that time was with Michelli. Michelli scratched. It's not been with McBain or whatever. But that's an $11,100 line. Krause and Doan specifically, they're both listed as wingers. They're moderately expensive, $8,500, but a 2-man like that makes it a lot easier to fit in your Ottawas or your Carolinas or whatever. So I don't mind you a 2-man from Utah 3 if you need to save a bit of money, but it's Utah 2 where my interest is. On the New Jersey side, I'm out on the Hischier line. Like I say it all the time, whenever Dawson's Mercer there, I'm out. 95 minutes for that second line with Dawson Mercer there since Thanksgiving, 2.7 expected goals, 2 actual goals per 60. Like, Hischier's the only guy on his line on the top power play unit. Like, I'm just out on that. Like, there's just no interest for me in that. For me, the interest is Hughes, Bratt, and Palat. Last 20 games for the Hughes line, 3.3 goals per 60 minutes. Jack Hughes in his last 20 games, 12 goals and 3.7 shots per game. You can leave off Palat if you want, just 2-man Hughes and Bratt, but at 17K, that line's not coming in with much ownership, 6.5%. Top 2 stack percent is a little bit higher. New Jersey's power play is still great. Now, Utah is starting to take a lot fewer penalties. That's a bit of a concern. But, New Jersey can easily go, 1-for-1, 1-for-2 here tonight on the power play. You get another one at 5-on-5. That's kind of fine. And then if you get an empty net or something, or maybe you get a second power play goal, a second even strength goal, whatever, then you're laughing. I do like that Hughes line here. Hughes, Bratt, and Palat, they're my favorite line in this game. So I would go New Jersey 1, Utah 2, and then Utah 1. And I'll just shout out Utah 3. I think they're in play if you need a super cheap filler here tonight. Next game, we have the Chicago Blackhawks with a 2.8 total. They're going into Anaheim. Anaheim has a 3.2 total. Trevor Zegras still out of the lineup. He's, I believe this is his last game on a suspension. So the lineup should be Vetrano, Terry, and Strome. Top line for Anaheim with the second line of McTavish, Killorn, and Carlson. Now, Vetrano, Terry, and Strome have been really, really good for a while now. Going back 2 months, 3.2 expected goals, 3 actual goals per 60 minutes. With Zegras out, they're getting more ice time, so they're going to skate between 18 and 20 minutes. They're all on the same power play unit. Power play is not good, but, Chicago has been taking a lot more penalties. Power play time is still power play time. Frank Vetrano averaging 3 shots per game over his last 10 games. He's a guy that typically likes to shoot a lot. Anyway, this is an 8-game slate, and this Anaheim line has the 4th highest top 2 stack percentage. Now, they're coming in with a fair bit of ownership as well, but this Chicago team is just absolutely god-awful. Whether they're going to be matching up against the first line or the second line, it doesn't really matter. But, matching up against Bedard and Bertuzzi, that line, 3.3 expected goals against, 4.1 actual goals against per 60. Like, Anaheim should be able to run them over. That Anaheim top line is one of those 18K lines that I like here tonight. They're right in line with Montreal and Buffalo. In a nutshell, I'd rather play Anaheim. They have the much higher top 2 stack percentage. The ownership I don't really care about. I can differentiate elsewhere. But if you want to avoid the ownership, then yeah, go play Montreal or something. But ownership relatively agnostic. I really do like this Anaheim line. I will also shout out Anaheim's second line here. McTavish, Killorn, and Carlson. They're another one of those 15K-ish lines. It is expensive, but McTavish and Carlson have been really good together this season. And here's the thing, is there are a lot of times when a Leo Carlson line will actually generate offense well, but not score. They're generating offense well, and they're scoring. McTavish and Carlson, 65 minutes together, 2.6 expected goals, 2.8 actual goals. Those are both above average. Listen, above average sounds like a slap in the face, but considering how bad basically Anaheim has been for most of this season, above average is actually pretty good. At the low end, Carlson will probably skate like 16 minutes. At the high end, you might get McTavish at like 19 minutes. Leo Carlson has 22 shots in his last 10 games. Like, this is another guy that typically doesn't shoot very much. Anytime he can get up around 2 shots per game, I think that's perfectly fine. McTavish is on the, quote, top power play unit. They get the more ice time. I don't think one is necessarily that much better than the other. But they're a nice mid-price line that's not coming in with very much ownership. They are overpriced, but it's that dynamic pricing thing where they're facing a horrific team. So I think Anaheim 2 is very much in play here, but it's Anaheim 1 where my interest is. And I will also shout out Cutter Gauthier. He's been a lot better since Christmas. I think it's like 8 goals in his last 25 games or something like that. It's not like elite production or anything, but for a rookie that only had like 4 goals in the first 30 games of the season or something, he's been a lot better. But it's Anaheim 1 that has my interest. On the Chicago side, like, it's one of those things where Chicago has a good matchup. Chicago is a 2 point. I don't remember the last time I saw Chicago with a 2.8 total on the road. That Bedard line, they're in play. 14,500, Bedard, Bertuzzi, Athanasiou. The top line for Chicago, 3.1 goals per 60 at 5-on-5 this season. Now that's shooting 13.7%, which is a bit high, but Bedard and Bertuzzi are going to be on the top power play unit. It's not a bad power play matchup for them. So I think the Chicago top line, considering how cheap they are perfectly fine. One thing I would be tempted to do is just to take Athanasiou off and put on Donato or something and just make it more of a power play stack. Anaheim, 3.9 times shorthanded per game over the last 5 weeks. I think that's tied for 4th or 5th most in the league. You go back to Christmas, it's the 5th most in the league. Like, they do take a lot of penalties. The one thing Chicago has generally had this season is a very good power play as long as Seth Jones has been healthy. So I think like a Bedard, Bertuzzi, Donato, Bedard, Bertuzzi, Teravainen, like something like that is where my interest is. I have no interest in their depth guys, Nazar, Slager, 2-man or something like that. Like, that's not where my interest is. My interest is in the Chicago power play guys. And considering their low price, and like Anaheim's a better team than Chicago, but they're not a good team. And Chicago's not going to get very many better matchups than that. And considering that their ownership is not that high, like, I'll bring up the ownership just for the team in general. Athanasiou under 9%, Seth Jones around 7%, Connor Bedard 6.5%. Like, all those guys are single digits, and this is still the Anaheim Ducks. So I do think the Chicago power play guys are very much in play here, but it's the Anaheim top line where my interest is in this game. All right, final game. What a dandy. Vancouver, 2.7 total going into Seattle. Seattle also has a 2.7 total. Just wonderful stuff here. You know you're in for a treat when both teams in this game have a lower implied total than the Chicago Blackhawks. Anyways, a Seattle top line over the last 200 minutes has been fine offensively, 2.6 goals per 60. They're all in the same power play unit. You know, they're under 14K, which makes them playable. I don't really have a ton of interest in Seattle, especially where I assume Kevin Lankinen is going to be back in net for Vancouver. It won't be Sheelov, so it's a tougher goalie matchup. Like, I'm going to be honest, considering there's 13,900, I would probably rather go play the Chicago top line. I would definitely rather go play that Carolina line, the Seth Jarvis, Jordan Staal, Jordan Martinook line that we talked about earlier. Look at a few other lines in that price range. You know, we mentioned that St. Louis, Thomas Buchnevich Neighbors line, they're 14,500. The Utah second line of Genther, Hayton Kerfoot is 13,900. Like, there are just other lines in that price range I would much rather play. I don't have anything against it particularly. They're just nowhere near my favorite line in that price range. So, like, same kind of goes for the McCann, Wright, Burakovsky line. Like, they're only $400 cheaper. So in that price range too. And they're coming in with a fraction under 1% top 2 stack. So, like, considering all these lines are basically in the same price range, and there are a lot of lines elsewhere between 13 and 15K that I'd rather play, I'm pretty much out on Seattle here. 2.7 total at home. Other lines I'd rather play. Like, I will say if I were to play anything from Seattle, it'd be McCann, Wright, Burakovsky. That line together, 67 shot attempts, 3 expected goals, 4.9 actual goals in 75 minutes together. Now, they're riding hot by shooting percentage, but even if they were shooting 10%, they'd be around 3.2 goals per 60, which is pretty good. They're split up on the power play. Their power play is terrible anyway. You're not stacking them for the power play, but they are playing pretty well at 5-on-5 together with Burakovsky on the wing. So if I were to play any of the Seattle lines, it'd be McCann, Wright, Burakovsky. Generally speaking, I don't have a lot of interest just because I think there are other lines in that price range I'd rather play. Speaking of lines in that price range, the Vancouver Canucks, the Pettersson line's 14,900. The Hedl line is 14,700, assuming those lines stick together. Both are coming in with under 1% ownership, so I guess you got to consider them. But listen, Elias Pettersson and Jake DeBrusk, 190 minutes together since Christmas, 2 expected goals, 1.6 actual goals per 60. Those are awful. Those are awful numbers. Elias Pettersson has 27 shots in his last 19 games. I think that's since he returned from injury, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe since January 1st. It's one or the other. 1.5 shots per game. What are you going to do with that? Hedl and Garland have been a little bit better. 2.5 expected goals together in about 45 minutes since Hedl got there. Garland, 20 shots in his last 10 games. Like, I guess it's like a Hedl, Garland, Joshua stack, but man, 14,700 for a Vancouver team that has been terrible offensively. If you look at, like, 14,500, St. Louis won right there. Chicago, take it or leave it, but like Utah right there. honestly, if anything in this game, it'd be the McCann, Wright, Burakovsky line. I don't really have a lot of interest in it, generally speaking. Like, this started at a 5.5 total and is trending down. When that happens, that's kind of like my blinker to stay away in a single entry. So not a lot to talk about in that one. But again, Wright, McCann, Burakovsky is probably where my interest would go. All right, let's move along to defensemen. Top of the board here tonight is Rasmus Dahlin. He's the top projected defenseman. He's not the top by point per dollar for the expensive guys, but he's the top projected defenseman. It is a really good matchup for him. So I have Dahlin first as well. Jake Sanderson is just behind him. Here's the thing is, like, I don't necessarily have a problem playing Jake Sanderson here tonight. He's not coming in with that much ownership, and like Rasmus Dahlin's ownership is just higher than him. Dahlin 10.3%, Sanderson 8.9%. I'd rather play Dahlin. So I think both are fine, but I go Dahlin, Sanderson, and then Josh Morrissey, just in case like Philadelphia has one of their classic, oh, we suck again games. I think Josh Morrissey is very much in play, but Dahlin and Sanderson top of the board. It's the mid-price range, like the 4 to 6K range, where my interest really is. Like Jake Wallman, he's projecting as the highest owned defenseman here tonight. He might come in around 20%, but Jake Wallman has the 4th highest projection, one of the best point per dollar projections. So I do like Wallman. Same thing with Jackson Lacombe from Anaheim. He's coming in with the 2nd most ownership, but he also has a very, very strong point per dollar projection. With Zegras out, he's back on the top power play unit. Again, power play sucks, but top power play minutes. Also, shout out Seth Jones here. Again, this is a really good matchup for Anaheim, but this is also one of the better matchups Chicago's ever going to get for the rest of the season. Seth Jones is a guy that can shoot and block shots. And again, the Chicago power play has been good. The Anaheim penalty, Anaheim's does take a fair amount of penalties. So I think Seth Jones is fine. But, you know, Wallman and Lacombe, I don't care about ownership from defensemen. Like if I play Jackson Lacombe and he's 20%, I don't care at all. So Wallman, Lacombe, Jones. If you want to go down in price a little bit, Vince Dunn is projecting very well. Jacob Trouba projects well, also in a very good home matchup. He's only 4K. So it's one of those things where, like, if he gets the shot bonus and donks and assists, like, you're fine. So, Vinny Dunn, Jacob Trouba, Owen Power. If you don't want to pay up for Rasmus Dahlin, I think Owen Power makes sense. Lane Hudson for Montreal. Saw the other day, he's the first defenseman to reach first rookie defenseman to reach 40 assists in fewer than 60 games since Nicholas Lidstrom. That seems good to me. He's in a good matchup against Buffalo. So, like, there are a lot of guys in that mid-price range. Like I said, Wallman, Lacombe, Seth Jones, Vince Dunn, Jacob Trouba, Owen Power, Lane Hudson. Throw Sean Dursey in the mix. Like, I think there are a bunch of guys in that 4 to 6K range that are very playable. If you want to get a little bit cheaper, Connor Murphy, though I fear that we may have missed the Connor Murphy ceiling game. I don't know. I forget exactly what it was, but I think it was 32.6 DraftKings points against Vegas. 3 assists, 6 blocks. Obviously, the points bonus plus the blocks bonus plus the shot on goal. Hell of a game from Connor Murphy, but him, Shane Gostisbehere, Alex Vlasic, Alex Carrier, Cam York, but those first 4, Murphy, Ghost, Gostisbehere, Alex Vlasic, Alex Carrier, especially for the punts, there are only 3 guys that are really sticking out to me. The top projected guy is Ian Cole from Utah, just because he blocks a lot of shots. I think that's fine. Wyatt Kaiser got called up by Chicago. I don't imagine he's going to play a ton of minutes, but I believe he's min-priced. And if he plays 17, 18 minutes, he's in a pretty good matchup. So Wyatt Kaiser, Stoneman, and Riker Evans. He's not getting those 21 minutes a game, but if he can play like 19, I think Riker Evans sub 3K is another cheap goalie that I would be considering here tonight. In net, oh boy. In net, the top projected goalie is Linus Ullmark. I have some questions, namely playing Linus Ullmark as the most expensive goalie on the board. I know he's generally been very, very good this season, especially after like Halloween. So he's playable. The thing is like Connor Hellebuyck is $100 cheaper. And if I have the choice between Connor Hellebuyck at home in a good matchup against Philly or Linus Ullmark at home in a good matchup against San Jose, I'll take Connor Hellebuyck. Like that's just kind of the way that I look at it. So Ullmark is fine. I'd rather play Hellebuyck. I think John Gibson is in play. John Gibson is going to be getting the start for Anaheim here tonight. There's always shutout equity against Chicago. He's projecting reasonably well, but I think for me, I'd rather play Hellebuyck here tonight. If you want to go down, I think Karl Vejmelka makes sense for Utah here tonight. He's only 7,400. He's projecting extremely well. We know how much New Jersey has typically struggled at 5-on-5. Everybody basically except Jack Hughes. So since like Christmas. So I think Vejmelka's in play at 7,400. Jordan Binnington at home against the Kings. Like, again, the Kings have a really bad penalty kill, and St. Louis, their big weakness has been, or power play, sorry. And St. Louis's big Achilles heel has been the penalty kill. If they don't give up any power play goals against, I think Binnington could have a good game here. He's also projecting extremely well. Fourth highest projected goalie playing tonight. So I think Vejmelka and Binnington, 7,400, 7,500 respectively, are very much in play. If you want to go all the way down, I think Arvid Soderblom for Chicago would be the guy. You know, Anaheim's not necessarily a high octane offense exactly. So whether it's Soderblom or Mrazek, I think one or the other's fine, but I don't see a real need to go below 7,400 Vejmelka or 7,500 Binnington unless you absolutely need the savings for a stack or something like that. All right, that does it for the Saturday show here today. Josh is still working through his technological issues. Obviously, he'll be back for the next show. We will be back, I believe, every day next week, Monday through Saturday. It starts the busy stretch of the NHL season, 6 weeks left in the season. I believe it's 6 weeks left in the season starting Monday. It starts a really busy stretch where we're going to be on pretty much Monday to Saturday most weeks. So we will be back Monday. Josh will be back Monday, barring another act of technological another technological deity stepping in and saying otherwise. My hat trick pick for tonight is going to be Nikolai Ehlers. I said I like Winnipeg too. I do like Winnipeg too. I like Nikolai Ehlers. Nikolai Ehlers is my hat trick pick. Thanks a lot for sticking it out here today. Again, we will be back on Tuesday. If you want to join Stochastic Premium, I'll drop the link in the chat. Again, never any pressure to do so, but if you feel so inclined, you can click the link that I just dropped in the chat. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. Good luck tonight, and we'll see you on Monday.